Hey everybody, the following contains spoilers for Fantastic Beasts and where to find them, so I recommend you check out the movie first before you proceed any further. Prequels suck. There, I said it. Seriously, I have never been a big fan of having a story go backwards in an attempt to tell an audience a new story. Prequels can never really hold any dramatic tension since you know exactly how events need to play out. You know which characters are going to make it through, you know how the character's story arc needs to bend in order to line up with how that character acted in the first movie, and finally there are the focused events that have to line up with continuity of the later films. So years ago, when Warner Brothers announced Fantastic Beasts, I was a tad skeptical. Clearly, WB must have missed the almost annual cash drops that the Potter franchise delivered for the better part of a decade, so they were probably just fine with Rowling wanting to tell another story. Or two. Or five. The only thing that gave me hope during the film's earliest days was that J.K. Rowling was going to write the screenplay on her own, and that both David Heyman, the Potter series producer, and David Yates, the director of the last 4 Potter films, were returning. Also probably helping was that 70-year gap in which this movie takes place and where the Potter series began. So now, after seeing the film, what did I think? Well, while far from being perfect, Fantastic Beasts is a very enjoyable entry into a new series in the Potter universe. It's a story that doesn't really rely on making a million connections to the Potter series itself, but rather attempts to carve out its own path. And it starts to, but it leaves a little bit too much for the inevitable sequels to cover. So let's get started. First and foremost, the 4 main characters are enjoyable to watch, and nice thanks in part to the actors and actresses. The bad thing here is that they're not really developed or really given any strong arcs. It feels like in spots that Rowling was holding back on providing some more details on these 4 main characters to explore it later in the sequels. For example, Newt, played by Eddie Redmayne, is very distant from people throughout the movie, finding much more in common with his magical creatures. Though the film hints twice at a friendship Newt had while he was at Hogwarts with a girl called Leta Lestrange. Yeah, that Lestrange. Clearly something happened between the two, but the film never really gives us the details. I can assume that perhaps Newt had a relationship with Leta, only to be taken quite aback when she followed in her family's shady activities. This no doubt would have pushed Newt more into his work with the magical creatures. This is a decent assumption, but that's all it is, an assumption. Without any real concrete evidence or details, Newt just comes off as a kind of alright main character. You can tell that he cares about his magical creatures, the scene inside his case is brilliant at showing his connection with them all, but that's really all we're given. I am positive that Rowling will eventually reveal more about his background as we progress through the series, but it's a shame that we just have to wait now. The Goldstein sisters, Tina and Queenie, were actually alright. Tina, played by Katherine Waterston, just wants to get her job back at MACUSA, and she's willing to do anything to do that. Although I would have liked to see more of her flashback scene where she attacked Mary Lou at the second Salem Rooms meeting, as that probably would have strengthened the resolve of her character a little bit more. Her sister Queenie, played by Alison Siddall, was a joy to watch as her bubbly personality kind of makes the character work on its own. I'm actually just really glad Rowling didn't use her as like comic relief, you know, like the dumb blonde character type. She's pretty handy with her talent at legilimency, which creates some of the more funnier moments. And finally there was Jacob, played by Dan Fogler, who probably was the best bit of the movie. His reactions to the various magical things happening around him is priceless, and go figure, in a story filled with wizards, it was probably the no-mage that stole the show half the time. I'll give an honorable mention to Colin Farrell as Percival Graves, surprising because most fans had assumed that he was going to ruin this movie outright. He does a really great job of hiding Graves' true intentions. You're never really sure what his endgame is. I actually thought near the end that he was just going to turn out to be a follower of Grindelwald, but the twist that he actually was Grindelwald in disguise was just as good, even if it wasn't really explained how that all worked out. The characters that I weren't too thrilled with would probably be Mary Lou, the head of the second Salemers, and her kids Credence and Modesty. Yeah, Mary Lou gave me the creeps, and the song Modesty sings about killing witches is pretty messed up if you really listen to those lyrics, but they never really did anything too drastic. Sure, Mary Lou beats Credence with a belt off screen, but that's it in terms of making you hate her. You know, for a group that believes in witches and wizards and wants to eliminate them, they don't really do anything to them in the entire movie. I mean, how about a scene where they capture a would-be witch or wizard at like a young age and they kill her because they view him or her as an abomination? I know that sounds incredibly dark, but think about the hate that it would create for Mary Lou and the second Salemers. Though would that scene have been any worse than the way MACUSA was going to kill off Newt and Tina? I mean, dropping them into a pensieve of their best memories only to burn them with acid? That's just sick. Also, side note, I love the names that Rowling comes up with for her characters. There's been a ton of really good ones. But really, Mary Lou? Seriously? I know it's supposed to sound all pure and Puritan and innocent, but I mean, it just sounds like the name of a character from The Grinch. That's just a personal pet peeve I guess I had. Also, the film kind of wastes John Voight as he's got like 3 scenes, and when he showed up near the ending, I actually had almost forgotten he was in the movie. The other really positive thing would be the magical creatures, which you'd assume they would be interesting since, well, that's thanks in part to the film's title. The CGI has really come a long way since the first Potter film in that the creatures now really fit seamlessly into the environment. A shout out to the Niffler for providing some of the more comedic moments in the early goings. Also, big props to Swooping Evil. That thing is better than a wand. I mean, Newt used it more than his own, and it's awesome. Newt's bow truckle was also really cool, and that had a ton of personality for such a small little creature. Each of the creatures is interesting to look at and provides a nice scene where Newt has to kind of recapture them. The creature recapturing scenes and the designs, that really does show that Rowling's creativity is abundant no matter whether she's writing a novel or a movie. There are a few faults with some of the plot developments, such as how Grindelwald took Graves' place at MACUSA. I mean, was he one of the wizards in the opening scene that attacked Grindelwald? Also, how did Newt realize that Graves really was Grindelwald? I mean, he just sort of used the Revelio charm out of nowhere. I mean, yes, Graves spoke about the greater good and has the Deathly Hallows symbol, but I mean, any one of his followers would probably know that, so I mean, it's not a guarantee it would be him. Also, how did Grindelwald know that the Obscurus was in one of Mary Lou's children? He claims to have seen it via a prophecy, and prophecy in the Harry Potter universe has always been kind of a gray area in how that works. But was he just lying to Credence about that, or did he really see some of it? And the stuff with the Shaws and Langdon Shaw wanting to expose witches and wizards, that didn't really amount to anything, and honestly, all of their scenes could have been cut, and it wouldn't have affected anything. These aren't, again, really plot-breaking issues, they're just sort of minor little hiccups or faults that kind of detracted from the whole experience. Now, there are moments where Rowling seems to be hinting at things to come in the sequels, and that's where this film gets increasingly more interesting. We learned that in last month that Grindelwald is going to be heavily featured in the sequel along with a younger Dumbledore. That being said, the main villain of this film, Credence, or I guess the Obscurus more so, seems to be setting up Grindelwald's past with Dumbledore in a quite interesting way. See, we learn here that an Obscurus forms when a young witch or wizard suppresses their magic, and this could tie in brilliantly with Ariana Dumbledore. While she wasn't really suppressing her magic when the Muggles provoked her as a child, Rowling did make a note in Deathly Hallows book that stated that her magic violently shot out of her, and she couldn't attend school or leave the house because of it. So it is very possible that Ariana had an Obscurus. Grindelwald would definitely have been aware of this, having been Dumbledore's friend and having been present when Ariana died, so naturally once he begins his attacks across Europe, he would probably want to control something like that, wouldn't he? I really hope that Rowling is going in this direction, as it would fit in quite nicely. And it would also finally give us a chance to, talk about Dumbledore's backstory with his family, the thing that the Deathly Hallows movies painfully ripped out and didn't bother addressing. I'd also like to say that the music was really great. I'm always worried when we get a new composer in the Harry Potter series. It was basically like a nerve-wracking experience after John Williams left after the first three, but surprisingly, despite three other composers that took his place afterwards, it was all really good, and so naturally I was worried how this would go, but James Newton Howard really outdid himself. I mean, not only did he craft a unique theme for this series, but he even used bits of Hedwig's theme, and that is never a bad thing. I really hope that Howard sticks that out for the sequels and expands upon the themes he's created here. There's a nice vibe of tracks that sound fitting for the Potter series, and there's a nice mix of 1920s style music, particularly in Jacob's theme. Now, I know this review isn't really glowing and all around high praise, but trust me, I did enjoy this movie. There are a bunch of scenes that I really liked, such as Newt and Jacob recapturing the Erumpent, the scene inside of the case showing off all of the creatures, which was really beautiful, the part where Tina and Newt escape from MACUSA, and the ending fight with the Obscurial, and Frank's flight over New York. Though I can't help but feel like the film is a tad incomplete and that it's only going to get better with the sequels that are going to delve into more of Newt's background along with more of the backstory of Dumbledore and Grindelwald. For Rowling's first attempt at a screenplay, I'd say she did a very fine job. It is in no way an easy task to create an original story like this and have it firing on all cylinders. Sure, there are some issues and the characters aren't as developed as I would have liked, but I have a feeling they will be as we go further. A prequel movie to the Harry Potter series could have been something as easily lazy about setting up Voldemort or the Death Eaters or involving Harry's parents, things that would have just been a waste since we all know where that's going. I respect Rowling immensely for creating brand new characters and trying hard to tell a very original story, one in which we don't quite know where it's going. In short, Fantastic Beasts is an enjoyable entry to the Potter series, one that will definitely leave you interested in seeing where it's going to go next, which could be perceived as both a strength and a weakness. Still, I feel the story could have been a lot more boring and predictable if it wasn't in the hands of Rowling herself. I wish Rowling luck in scripting out the next couple of installments, and I'll leave you guys by saying that it might not be clear exactly where these characters or series is going with this first installment, but I think it is clear that we can expect great things from this series going forward. Thanks for watching.